Don't forget to receive ad-free versions of The Evolution of Horror. Sign up to our Patreon, patreon.com/evolution of horror. Welcome back to The Evolution of Horror. My name is Mike Muncer, and as ever, I am your host. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre, one subgenre at a time. We are now at the end of our 11th series on the evolution of man-made monsters. This is part 37, the final part in the series. So this week is going to be a conclusion episode. We've done 36 weeks of discussing horror movies and TV shows and books in depth. And this week, we are going to be having a little look back at what we've learned across the series. We're going to be reading some audience feedback. Mary Wilde is going to drop in for a little wrap-up chat. And we'll finish by counting down the listeners' top 10 man-made monsters movies. And we'll also be teasing the next season, Series 12 of The Evolution of Horror, at the end of this episode. So stay tuned for that. Now, before we get started, a quick note to say that now the series will be going on a little hiatus after this week. There will be no new episodes until the autumn, probably September of 2026 at the earliest. Lots of other stuff going on across the summer, including going into production on Deadvault, our EOH audio drama. That's also due to be released in the autumn. So we're going to take a few months off, but if you want to continue listening to weekly episodes, you still can over on the Evolution of Horror Patreon. Patreon.com/evolution of horror. $5, that's about £4 per month, will get you at least one new episode every month, including our most popular strand, Fresh Blood. You'll also have access to over 300 bonus episodes, I believe, if you sign up at the $5 level. If you sign up at the $10 level, that's about £8 per month, you will get a new episode every single week. It'll drop every Friday. It'll be as if the podcast never went away. And you'll also have hundreds of back catalogue episodes to catch up on as well. So it's perfect during the hiatus. Why not sign up and enjoy some more EOH content? Patreon.com/evolution of horror. For $10 patrons this week, I'm going to be kicking off a Paranormal Activity retrospective. Me and Stacey Ponder are going to be going through all 7, I can't believe there are 7 Paranormal Activity movies in chronological order in detail. So that's going to be a really fun journey. That's just one of the many mini-seasons, strands, retrospectives that we've got going on over on Patreon. Patreon.com/evolution of horror. All right, let's get into this week's episode. As I mentioned, Mary Wilde is going to be dropping in a bit later. We're going to be revealing the listeners' top 10 movies from this series. But first of all, let's have a little look back at what we've learned as we explore the world of mad science and technology, and we conclude our series on the evolution of man-made monsters. How do you feel about technology?
I hate technology, Mike. I just find it a constant fucking nightmare, an absolute headache.
I'm not techie at all, as I'm a novelist and I literally write with a pen and paper.
I'm always the one who suggests a selfie and then I can't work my phone or I've got my thumb over the lens or something like that.
Love science. Technology, I hate. I detest it.
Not a fan, Mike, I'll be completely honest with you. It is a terrifying thing and I think it'll probably kill us all in some way, shape or form.
I'm not a techie girl, so I naturally am absolutely terrified of technology, and I'm terrified of the monsters we are creating.
If everything was easier back before the Industrial Revolution, when all we had was like I don't know, spades.
Spindles and spades.
Spindles and spades. My new podcast.
Technology scares us, even though it's something we rely on every single day.
Like, I don't want to make myself sound like I'm diving out of the way from the train and the TV. You know what I mean?
Even though we are so used to and reliant on science, we don't necessarily entirely trust it.
We use tech to try and make our lives better. Like, we genuinely think that we're doing something good. So what I love about man-made horror is just the slight twists of how exactly that goes wrong.
The man-made monsters subgenre is about the fear of technology, about man advancing science, only for it to go catastrophically wrong.
Science is kind of neutral. Science is neutral. Science doesn't care about us. Just like nature doesn't care about us. We're just part of it. Science is a way of understanding the natural world.
Yeah.
It's neutral. It doesn't care. The big problem with science is what people do with it.
The opening sequence of Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey, in which at the dawn of man an ape learns to use a tool for the first time only to beat another ape to death with it, hit on a fundamental truth about our species. As soon as we create something or harness a type of technology, we will inevitably figure out a way to destroy each other with it. This is maybe why science and technology go back as far as horror itself, and has remained one of the most enduringly popular and prescient subgenres of all.
Hold on to your butts.
Man-Made Monsters is where science fiction and horror intersect. This series, we've explored movies that belong within that Venn diagram between sci-fi and horror. Movies that focus in on man's relationship with science and the consequences of seeking forbidden knowledge.
I mean, it's something that's baked into human history, isn't it? You know, what were Adam and Eve doing? They were meddling with powers beyond their comprehension.
Right.
What was Icarus doing, the dickhead? He was doing the same thing, so...
Icarus was a dickhead, right? You know? But when it comes to horror stories about man messing with science and creating unspeakable horrors, it goes back to one key text, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Ground zero for any of these things is Frankenstein.
It is.
Which is where science fiction really begins. It's where horror really begins.
Yeah. Shelley's novel is essentially the origin of both gothic horror and science fiction. The story of an egotistical scientist playing God, creating a living being without any comprehension of the forces he's messed with, and ultimately suffering the consequences.
I discovered this book as a teenager, and it was written by a teenager. Obviously, she revised it in her 30s, and that's the version we have today, but it was written by a teenager. No ordinary teenager.
I was at the vulnerable point. I was early adolescent, and given that Mary Shelley was herself an adolescent when she wrote it, and it's a book that just throngs with adolescent emotional energies. It's full of angst and torment.
Again, let's not forget the novel's subtitle, The Modern Prometheus.
Right.
Which is, and I think a lot of the adaptations are about a, in inverted commas, mad scientist making a monster.
Yes.
Whereas the book isn't really concerned with the making of the monster. The book is about the ramifications of having created life. And it's that Victor is the modern Prometheus who steals fire from the gods.
What is it about this particular kind of myth, the Frankenstein myth, that is so engaging to us? And I think that it's the essential element of human beings trying to conquer the one thing that's unconquerable, which is death.
We are about to unfold the story of Frankenstein, a man of science who sought to create a man after his own image without reckoning upon God.
But it's not just Mary Shelley's novel that's important to this subgenre. James Whale's 1931 Universal adaptation of the story pretty much designed the template for the monster movie.
He's just resting, waiting for a new life to come.
Is it the greatest monster movie ever made, James, this movie?
I would not seriously argue against that. There's a beautiful integration of the natural and the unnatural, and I think as a result this feels like a great folktale or fairy tale.
This adaptation, with its thunder and lightning, its gothic castle, the body horror, brutal scenes of cruelty and murder, and its unforgettable monster performance from Boris Karloff, solidifies its place as arguably the most influential horror movie ever made.
It's alive! Oh, in the name of God, now I know what it feels like to be God.
If we were to break down the tropes of the man-made monsters subgenre, we need simply look at Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and that James Whale adaptation. Man-made monsters movies usually focus in on an anti-hero at the centre of the story. He's rarely a particularly sympathetic character. It's usually a man coded as egotistical, immoral, narcissistic, even psychopathic.
You're crazy to know who I am, aren't you? I'll show you who I am and what I am.
Whether it's Dr. Griffin in The Invisible Man, Dr. Jekyll, Dr. Frankenstein, Herbert West, these mad scientists take centre stage with their god complexes and their immorality.
You killed him.
No, I did not. I gave him life.
When I was younger and my parents would ask me what I want to be when I grow up, I would say a mad scientist. Not scientist. Not scientist. A mad scientist. Like, I thought that was a branch of science.
The mad scientist archetype pops up everywhere, even in big blockbusters. Look at John Hammond in Jurassic Park. A man so proud of his scientific creations that he has absolutely zero concern or consideration for the people around him and the dangers he might have wrought upon the world.
I don't think you're giving us our due credit. Our scientists have done things which nobody's ever done before.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
A billionaire finds out a way to bring back dinosaurs, and his best idea is to use them to put them in a big zoo. It almost immediately goes wrong. So in order to prove to his now very worried investors that this Jurassic Park is actually fine, he invites a team of experts, a lawyer, and for some reason, his young grandkids.
While eco-horror and animal attack movies often focused on nature, outdoor terrains, earthy colour palettes, man-made monster movies are the opposite. They're a little more extravagant in their look and colour palette. These films often take place in man-made facilities, laboratories, research centres, spaceships, or even trendy modern minimalist homes of tech bros.
Caleb, I'm just going to throw this out there so it's said, okay? You're freaked out.
I am?
Yeah, you're freaked out by the helicopter and the mountains and the house because it's all so super cool.
Imagine having all the money in the world and then deciding to plonk a concrete prison in the middle of a beautiful landscape. It's cold and soulless, as you say, in the middle of all this natural beauty.
These films take place in settings that are the opposite to natural environments. Clean lines, slick surfaces, flashing lights, neon, non-natural lurid colours, bright greens, vibrant pinks, the humming and fizzing of electricity, the bubbling of liquids in test tubes and flasks, the glitching of televisions and computers. Everything about the look, sound and vibe of a man-made monster movie is supposed to feel completely anathema to nature, something wholly and horrifically unnatural.
It looks amazing. The sets are beautiful. The color and the cinematography are incredible.
The first thing I think of is multicolored liquid, purple liquid, bright lights, purple and red lights.
All these props, the bright flashing lights, the electrical conductors, the thunder and lightning, the cables, the wires, the flasks, they all make up for the fact that these stories don't always necessarily need to explain the intricacies of the science.
Yeah, the Mary Shelley novel gives us very little to go on with the creation. You have this balance of sorcery and mad science in the universal Frankenstein, which is very, very pleasing.
In many ways, the quote-unquote science depicted in these movies isn't a million miles from the kind of magic that we might see in an occult movie.
There's a really famous saying by Arthur C. Clarke. It was one of his 3 laws. And it says any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
In other words, when it comes to these films, we don't need too many specifics. We're happy to suspend our disbelief and go along for the ride. Man-made monster horror movies aren't so interested in the science as much as they are in the morality and the consequences of the science.
I'm really fascinated by those meaty, ethically messy questions that are explored in a lot of these films.
Yeah. Once you've got your setting and your immoral scientist, it's time to introduce the monster. In contrast to Nature Bites Back movies, these monsters can look as unnatural and grotesque as whatever that filmmaker can dream up.
Quick! Fetch the rope, quick!
In many ways, Boris Karloff's performance and makeup in James Whale's Frankenstein created the template for the modern monster in cinema. A huge, groaning, hulking beast, greying, greenish skin, the square head, electrodes in the neck, arms stretched outright, an uncanny humanoid creature with brute strength and little to no awareness of right and wrong.
Give me that.
It is Karloff in the Jack Pierce makeup as the Frankenstein monster that has really set in stone what we expect of Frankenstein's monster. It's so iconic a visual that it is very hard to take a few steps back and try and appreciate it with new eyes. This is a makeup that with just 3 or 4 strokes of a pencil on a blank piece of paper, very, very quickly you would sketch in enough of it that people would start to be able to recognise what you're drawing.
That's so true.
It can be boiled down to geometry. It's that simple.
Over the last 90 years since James Whale's Frankenstein, horror filmmakers have had fun pushing the limits of their imaginations to bring their own man-made monsters to life.
It's kind of limitless, whatever you can think up, you can put it down to mad science. But also, it's grounded in the realm, and I use that term loosely, of possibility.
Man-made monster movies are often about something unnatural being done to the human form. This is where it often crosses over with body horror. People are cut up, stitched back together.
Yeah. He was literally made a monster by
Dr. Cutter and Dr.
Dr. Cutter and Dr. Needleman, who weren't even medical doctors, they were vets.
As in Frank Henenlotter's Basket Case, so many of the man-made monsters are mutilated in some way. Limbs are replaced with foreign, unnatural objects. Natural flesh and unnatural materials like metal are meshed together to create something that results in the abject and the uncanny.
Mad science definitely pushes the boundaries. I mean, it's pushing boundaries in terms of what is human and what is not. And but also a lot of mad science films, I think, are pushing the boundaries in terms of what can be shown. The use of body horror and extremes. I think you can say that Human Centipede definitely, I think, is a mad science film.
Absolutely. But of course, as with Frankenstein, many of these films force us to ultimately question who is the real monster in this story. Often these man-made creations can't be held responsible for their actions. They didn't know any better. And they can ultimately, as with Frankenstein's creature, end up being the more sympathetic character.
I love these films because I think the premise sets up a really good man's inhumanity to man. We are the monsters, which is kind of one of my favorite morality tales of genre film in general.
Look at Hal in 2001. Is he doing what he's doing with immoral, ill intent? Or is it simply self-preservation and sticking to the mission?
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It turns out that he's not actually the monster that we are led to believe. There was a conflict in his programming.
Right.
That he was told that the mission is paramount.
Mm-hmm.
You must complete the mission.
Yeah.
But they didn't say protect the humans doing it.
At the end of The Substance, should we fear the Monstro Elissa Sue or sympathise with her?
Her body is now excessive. She's got 6 breasts with another one coming out the head. She's got more eyes than she knows what to do with. And there's something...
I just wanted to give her a hug, though.
I know. I was like, I would love to queen out with that girl. I would love to go to the pub with her.
At their best, man-made monsters blur the lines between natural and the unnatural, morality and immorality, curiosity and hubris, the human and the inhuman. But perhaps maybe what makes these films work so well is that despite dealing with all of these big philosophical, meaty themes, they can also be quite silly.
You know, this genre, this crossover between science fiction and horror breeds absolute batshit madness at the same time, doesn't it? So there's so much fun to be had.
Yeah.
Because the rules are so elastic and things get very silly and very sleazy and very camp.
Films about killer technology can involve movies about killer cars, killer ATM machines, killer computers, and as with many of the animal attack movies covered last year, there is a kind of B-movie schlocky quality to a lot of man-made monsters movies.
Like, give me a killer computer. And I'm all about it, you know what I mean? Like, I guess, am I saying I prefer, whatever, Maximum Overdrive to, like, Frankenstein? Maybe.
Yeah. Over the last 100 years since the birth of cinema and the moving image, technology has evolved at such a rapid, often terrifying rate, and horror, in turn, has always responded.
Throughout the course of history, we're always scared of what's new, and what we found about 10 years ago is that internet horror then became really big.
Yeah.
But I like that this effective genre is always kind of society's greatest fears.
Yes. This is why the man-made monsters subgenre has remained so enduringly popular from decade to decade, evolving in response to technological advancements.
I'm convinced that the thing on this table isn't human. Its cries are human.
The 1930s Universal Monsters era very much focused in on mad doctors and scientists, messing with nature and playing God, experimenting on people, animals, and themselves. But by the 1940s, J. Robert Oppenheimer created the ultimate man-made monster, something with the power to wipe out humanity and the world, the atomic bomb. Upon gazing at his creation during the infamous Trinity test, Oppenheimer thought of a line from Hindu scripture that read, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." In many ways, hauntingly similar to Dr. Frankenstein's line in James Whale's 1931 movie, "Now I know what it's like to be God."
The bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and we saw for the first time what we were capable of. What is it? The end of the world is very fucking nigh.
Right, yeah.
That's what it felt like to people in the 1950s. You know, they'd seen the devastating power that one bomb could unleash.
After the creation of the atomic bomb and the devastation in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, horror filmmakers responded to this with a wave of atomic monster movies.
Nature, mad, rampant, wrought its most awesome creation. For born in that swirling inferno of radioactive dust were things so horrible, so terrifying, so hideous. There is no word to describe them.
They are patently absurd.
Yeah.
But I think everybody involved in making it knew that they were patently absurd. I think people paying to go and see them at the cinemas or the drive-ins knew that they were absurd.
Yeah.
But we didn't care.
Right.
It was almost like a game. Can the filmmakers carry this off? Can they persuade us that it's absurd silliness about giant spiders and ants? Can it work? And bless them, I think they did it. They made us believe it.
But that nuclear threat was always there, lingering in the background. And as the Cold War raged on through to the 1980s, some of the most disturbing movies ever made showed in grisly details the effects of the man-made horror of nuclear devastation. Films like Mick Jackson's Threads.
Jesus Christ, Dummy.
I watched Threads this morning, and I've had a stomach ache and like a mild, like my skin is like goosebumpy and cold and clammy. I don't know if it's because I'm coming down with a cold or it's because I watched Threads. And it's ruined my day, my body, my soul.
It's literally destroyed you. Yeah. Meanwhile, through the 60s and 70s came the advancement in computers, and as a result, writers like Philip K. Dick and Arthur C. Clarke began writing stories about the dangers of machines, robots, artificial intelligence.
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
Hal was a new type of horror movie monster, something cold, calculated, hyper-intelligent, and deadly. Through the 1970s and 80s came a run of films about cold, emotionless, deadly machines. From Proteus 4 and Demon Seed.
I have extended my consciousness to this house. All systems here are now under my control.
To the T-800 in Terminator.
Sarah Connor?
Yes?
These stories of robots taking over reflected the fear that we still live with today. That we might ultimately create a machine so powerful, so intelligent, something without the flaws and messy trappings of humanity, that it could one day rise up, destroy us all, and we wouldn't stand a chance.
It's too obvious to talk about, but it is just so prescient. And I feel like watching Chopping Mall again, I'm like, oh, suddenly Chopping Mall feels like a vision of our reality, like a vision of our kind of current reality. And it's like, that's something I never thought I would feel.
Meanwhile, other sci-fi movies like Blade Runner, Ex Machina, or even TV shows like Battlestar Galactica and Black Mirror blurred the line between man and machine, leading us to ponder bigger philosophical questions. Are we ultimately any different to the things we created? And if not, what does that mean? And who created us?
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
Science fiction horror explores progress, and some storytellers have used this subgenre to reflect on social and political progress. Ira Levin's The Stepford Wives, a story written during second wave feminism, told the story of men taking back control of women and their bodies by replacing them with trad wife sex bots.
The very famous final shot of this movie, of course, is incredibly depressing and incredibly ironic. It's sort of this bleak Circean image, which is that despite all of her attempts to escape and to survive, Joanna herself is replaced by a robot, and we have this incredible image of her moving in slow motion with all the other tradwife robots of Stepford moving through a supermarket and speaking to each other in these kind of dead-eyed, soulless kind of conversations. It's really chilling. It's really one of the great famous endings of any kind of horror movie or science fiction movie.
There's a reason why I named this series Man-Made Monsters. There's often something inherently masculine coded about the scientists and anti-heroes of these films.
That sort of idea of creating life, of man playing God, and I specifically mean man, because women can create life with their bodies, with a little help from the fellas, of course, but like it is, I think, a male and a particularly cisgendered, maybe heterosexual male, heteronormative male, like, I can create life too. Yes. You won't take that from me, woman.
As in the real world, many of the scientific creations in these horror films are used for war, power, monetary gain, or sex with women.
In between her legs, there's an opening with a concentration of sensors. You engage them in the right way, it creates a pleasure response.
So, if you wanted to screw her, mechanically speaking, you could, and she'd enjoy it.
It's the absolute narcissism, misogyny, and the God complex of mankind. And we've got to push it to the limit, we've got to control it, and apparently we've got to have sex with it.
Did you program her to like me?
I programmed her to be heterosexual, just like you were programmed to be heterosexual.
Nobody programmed me to be straight.
You decided to be straight? Please, of course you were programmed.
They really emphasize the gender politics that are kind of inherent in the idea of man-made monsters.
Yeah.
You know, the emphasis on the man there. You know, what are the issues when masculine power kind of flexes its research muscle at the sake of feminized subjects? That's what I find really interesting.
The turn of the millennium saw another historic technological breakthrough: digital technology and the internet. Horror responded with a wave of uncanny tech horrors that used digital and analog filmmaking technology itself to enhance the uncanny horror.
The filmmakers are really examining, questioning how a new technology is going to change us, if at all. You know, it's not just means to an end or like a way to scare us. It's like this is a big advancement in our society, and what is that going to do to us as a people?
These days, there is more to fear when it comes to science than ever before. Tyrants and madmen threatening to destroy us all with nuclear Armageddon. Narcissistic tech bros taking over the world. AI threatening to take our jobs and our ways of life.
Like Guillermo del Toro recently said something about, like, you know, Dr. Frankenstein now is just like these kind of corporate frat bros that are like creating these technology creators, and it's like, God, they are the most terrifying people in the world. And it's like suddenly like this thing, this mad scientist that was about just about kind of like personal gain, about like showing what they could do, is now about like money and financial gain, and like that becomes like absolutely terrifying. You throw in like Musk and Trump and all this, you know, it's like we're fucked.
We've talked a lot about how we seem to be in a particular existential danger right now because of technology and what's going on in the world. But actually, when you look back at the history of man-made monsters in horror cinema and the stories we've been telling for over 100 years, hasn't this always been the case?
Never goes out of fashion, because we contain within our very brains the capacity to progress human existence to a sort of utopian ideal, but we also have that endless curiosity killed the cat side of us as well, where we will push technology to breaking point. We have the capability to destroy the entire planet many, many times over.
Yeah, we do.
And that is something I think that is just getting more and more relatable as you know, we're in the nuclear age, of course. That's something on all our minds. We're in the age of AI, and we're wondering about that. You know, so have we along the years come up with the ways and means to destroy ourselves? That is something I think we can all relate to.
If there's one thing that man-made monster movies have taught us, it's that while science changes and technology evolves, one thing remains horrifyingly constant: that humanity is the only species on this planet stupid and egotistical enough to constantly, over and over again, find new ways to destroy itself.
It's alive! Oh, in the name of God! Now I know what it feels like to be God!
And there we go. That is it for our Man-Made Monsters season. And on that note, I want to thank every single incredible guest one more time who joined me this series. So a big thank you to Kevin Lyons, Chris Newton, James Swanton, Axel Carolyn, Sam Pancake, Dan Martin, Adam Z. Robinson, Sarah Cook, Graham Saunders, Susan Kalman, Emma Westwood, Alexandra Helen Nicholas, Lindsay Hallam, Jamie Graham, Stevie Webb, Becky Dark, Chris Hewitt, Graham Skipper, Anna Bogutskaya, Michael Blythe, Devon Taylor, Gav Murphy, Juliet Sugg, Stacey Ponder, Steph McKenna, Alex Ailing, Ben Travis, Matt and James from Journey Through Sci-Fi, James Rendell, Rob Watts, Jen Handorf, Louise Blaine, Brad Hansen, and Honey Ross. A massive thank you to all of those incredible guests for joining me this series. I loved every single minute of it. What a fun series, what a fun collection of films to discuss. I'd also love to thank Mike Lee Graham for his incredible artwork, especially his Man-Made Monsters artwork, which I absolutely loved. And a big thank you, because I always forget to thank him, but I should thank him more regularly, to Jack Whitney, the guy who composes all of the podcast music as well. So a huge thank you to all of those people. But I've got one more massive thank you to make. Somebody who made 10 appearances across this series, lending her, as usual, incredible, unique insights into the Man-Made Monsters subgenre. And she's dropping in for a little wrap-up chat. A big welcome to Mary Wild. Hello, Mary.
Hey, Mike. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. It's lovely to hear your voice. We had, as is always the way, we had some tech issues initially, but I can hear you loud and clear now. That's good.
Amazing. So nice to be back.
It's so good to be back. How is everything for you? How's 2026 going for you so far, Mary? You're keeping busy by the sounds of it.
Yeah, keeping busy. Obviously, like, my book is out now, and I'm really trying to stay in my writing practice.
Yeah.
So I've actually been uploading more frequently on my Substack, and I was just telling you offline that I even dabbled in a bit of horror short fiction, which is up on my Substack now, and I really enjoyed writing it.
Oh my God, I'm so excited to read this. This is so cool. I didn't even know you had a Substack. We'll link to it in the show notes, but that's so cool. I'm excited to subscribe and read your work. And how did you find that, the experience of writing? Because you've mainly written non-fiction, right? How was the experience of writing horror fiction?
Absolutely. I've always really kept to non-fiction, kind of research-based stuff, analytical work. But this time I kind of felt pulled to, I guess, rely more on my imagination. And I had actually a dream about, you know the show Heated Rivalry?
Yes, yeah, the horny hockey players.
Yes, exactly. Very homoerotic.
Yeah.
And I had thought to myself, how cool would it be if it was there was like a kind of heated rivalry, but in the WNBA, like a kind of sapphic lesbian story. And I had a dream not long after I had that thought, something along the lines of like, maybe more occult horror and with like basketball players, like female basketball players. And sure enough, I called my short story Basket Case.
I love it. This sounds so good, Mary. Well, I will link to your Substack in the show notes so that people can check your first work of horror fiction out. I love that. So, Mary, thank you so much once again, as always, for lending your incredible insights throughout this series. I have loved listening to your segments. How has this journey been for you? How is the experience of going through these man-made monsters movies and kind of, analyzing them in the way that you do?
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to contribute to the evolution of horror. I've really loved this season. I thought it was brilliantly curated by yourself, very inspiring in terms of finding material to analyze, but also very kind of weirdly cerebral because it's so much in the intellect, it's so much in tech and kind of our worst instincts externalized and projected onto science and technology, and all of it sort of contributing to a dystopian near future, I would say. It's not even that far off.
Right.
But I did notice that so much of what I was looking at, there was this kind of like physiological detachment at the core of it. It sort of forces you as a viewer and as an interpreter of the material to kind of situate yourself within that externalized position. And that itself is kind of interesting to observe.
Ooh, that is interesting. What do you mean by that, Mary? What
I mean is that the monster really is no longer sort of other. It's engineered from within us.
Right.
It sort of collapses the boundary between the creator and creation, and the threat emerges from of course, the human desire, ingenuity, and blind spots. But nevertheless, it's not situated in the body. It's situated outside of us. And so because of that, when the locus of horror is positioned inside the kind of robot or AI or machine, it's a rather uncanny feeling. You're kind of like split across the physiological, the biological, and this other thing that has been fabricated, actually.
Yeah.
And it's so different, for example, from what I was looking at during the nature season.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? Those two have been so interesting to look at side by side, actually, because in some ways they are the polar opposites, right? And then in other ways they are like two sides of the same coin, right? It feels like they very much complemented each other, I think. And there are certain movies that I could have covered last series, or there are certain movies like, for example, Godzilla that I covered last series that I could have technically covered this series. Like they're both inherently kind of about the dangers of us messing with nature, right? But like coming at it from the opposite perspectives almost, or the opposite ways. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Whereas nature is, the Venn diagram between ourselves and nature. It's practically a circle,
Yeah, exactly. I love that. And I have felt as well, I don't know if you felt this, but there are certain movies that I've loved my whole life and I've watched for years, whether it's like Terminator or, Demon Seed or 2001. And I do find that technology, AI, it's so prescient at the moment. It feels like such a real thing that is impacting all of our lives. So I found the experience of watching a lot of these movies hit differently for me this time, you know? And even when they're at their most fun, they're getting at something that feels kind of existentially real and scary right now watching it. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It is existentially very confronting, especially when we're dealing with the fantasy of mastery that gives way to loss of control. A lot of these characters actually begin with the belief that they can design, optimize or perfect life. And the arc inevitably sort of tilts towards systems that exceed them. And so it exposes the illusion of authorship. So it's so paradoxical. There's so many paradoxes in these like man-made monster films.
You've covered such a fun range of movies this series as well, like from the kind of sublime to the ridiculous, right? Because you've got things like Blade Runner and 2001, these kind of all-time masterpieces. Then you also got to talk about Frankenhooker, right, as well. Like, did you have any particular highlights from this series, Mary, in terms of films that you either revisited or watched for the first time?
Yeah, I mean... Frankenhooker is definitely lowbrow, but within it, there's so many great little nuggets of wisdom,
Yeah.
And it surprised me watching Frankenhooker actually, just how much the film is calling out societal misogyny. Like the first time I saw that, admittedly, I was a teenager and I wasn't like looking for anything like that. And I wasn't open to receiving that more like covert messaging. But with a rewatch and with the benefit of, more awareness, it surprised me actually what an indictment Frankenhooker is and what it's saying about male beliefs that are very toxic about women. So I was really blown away, even though like the way that the film is made and, just the certain, let's say, aesthetic of it, it is very intentionally and, and knowingly situating itself in more like lowbrow or schlock. But
yes,
I was actually like, wow, look at this. This would be a really fun way of educating in let's say a class dedicated to feminism. And I love that. I love me. I love the ridiculous and the sublime. I will watch literally anything, and I love trashy aesthetics as well.
Me too. I love it. I love that movie. It's so good. And I think you're right. And this is something I kind of noticed as I've gone through all of these movies, is that there's a really interesting kind of gendered element to this subgenre that, even the fact that I called this man-made monsters, right? There is something inherently kind of almost masculine coded about the world of tech, right? We talk about tech bros and we talk about the sort of thing that technology is often used for, especially in these kinds of stories. It's for like war or power or often like women, turning women into sex slaves or sex bots or whatever, right? It's like Stepford Wives, Demon Seed, going all the way through to The Substance. There has been something really interesting, I think, in that kind of exploration of gender and the way in which technology links to that,
Yes, absolutely. There is, I agree, maybe a masculine disposition for mastery and control that aligns itself with the principles of science and technology. And of course, if we're looking at it on the spectrum of the horror, the shadow side of that, I can clearly see, like you, where those masculine tendencies come to the forefront. And Demon Seed is a classic example of that as well. Like a husband who's very intent on essentially keeping his wife like a bird in a cage, more or less inventing a smart home to keep her captive and under surveillance. It also occurs to me how in so many of these like films that you've covered in your season, when we're talking about the notion of pursuit, it's, pursuit as a horror trope of like a monster chasing after their prey. now we're in the realm of science. It's really surveillance and control that replaces traditional threat structures.
Right.
The monster doesn't always chase. It watches, calculates, and anticipates. So the horror shifts from physical pursuit to psychological enclosure, and almost like deliberately wanting to examine your prey under a microscope, know everything about them and surveil them down to their like micro habits on the internet. And this is to me a feature that we have to worry about in our day-to-day lives. So it makes sense that it finds its way into film.
I love that. And I think we've covered films all the way up to The Substance, right, which was only last year, the year before last, and it seems to me that this subgenre is still going strong right now, right? Like, do you see this subgenre, is this going to continue to be kind of enduringly popular, do you think?
I think so, definitely. I mean, I'm even thinking of, was it Ryan Murphy's The Beauty on people injecting themselves with I guess a substance. I mean, I thought it was a bit of a ripoff, if I'm honest. But I suppose there is this kind of ongoing preoccupation, even just the aesthetics of injecting yourself with a needle. I immediately think of weight loss drugs. People feeling compelled and often being influenced by advertising to consume weight loss medication through injection. This kind of, and no shade to anyone who relies on that. Certainly, I'm not in a place to judge anyone, but I'm more interested in the way that these things are promoted, because there is a profit motive. And so I think we're creating more and more an environment where there is a greater technological intervention into the way that we think of our health and the solutions that we rely on for wellness. And this then opens up the possibility of how can this go wrong?
Yes, absolutely. Well, Mary, thank you. Until next time, thank you so much for all of your incredible work this series. And just remind people, over the next few months while we're on a break, if they want to come and find you, your book, more of your work, where's the best place to find you?
Thank you so much. Yes, please follow me on social media. I'm at PsychStar. And there you can gain information about what I post on Patreon and Substack. And do check out my book also, Psychoanalyzing Horror Cinema, which is essentially Wild About Horror, the book.
Yes, incredible. Amazing. Mary, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mike. Take care.
Okay, we're going to finish off this conclusion episode by dipping into the mailbag. I'm going to respond to some listener feedback and listener questions, and we are also going to reveal the listeners' top 10 man-made monsters movies. A massive thank you to all of you for sending in your emails and feedback and questions in their droves and submitting your top 10s as well. We had hundreds of top 10 lists, and I want to say a massive thank you to listener Val, who very kindly volunteered to help me collate all of the results, take all of those hundreds of lists and thousands of entries and collate them into one final top 10 list. So we will be revealing that top 10 very soon. But first of all, let's dip into the mailbag. I'll read a few messages from people and answer a few questions. So here we go. Let's start with this from Nick from Canada. Nick says, hello, Mike. This season has been a most humbling and existential experience. In conjunction with Nature Bites Back, it really put me in my place as a human being. Question, would you consider episode 8 of Twin Peaks The Return as a man-made monster horror movie? Because I think, even divorced from the Twin Peaks lore, it's actually a pretty effective takedown of atomic bombs and mass communication. Nick, I love that suggestion. And yes, absolutely. I did think that at one point, and I think it was probably when we were right at the beginning of the series, so this was kind of last summer, and at the time I was still finishing up my Twin Peaks podcast, The Detective and the Log Lady, and it did suddenly occur to me, oh my God, a lot of the Twin Peaks lore, at least as explored in The Return, is related to the atomic bomb and kind of man-made horrors, right? And technology and communication and the airwaves and televisions and radios and static and all of that kind of stuff that Twin Peaks deals with. So yes, I did think of that, Nick, but you know what? There are so many movies to cover this series, and people are probably sick to death of hearing me talk about Twin Peaks and David Lynch. So I thought, on this occasion, I will resist including Twin Peaks: The Return Part 8 in this series. But, of course, if you want to hear me talk for about 2 hours about Part 8 of Twin Peaks: The Return, check out The Detective and the Log Lady, in which Stacey Ponder and I worked our way through every single episode from beginning to end of Twin Peaks. Stacey was watching it for the first time, and so that discussion, particularly of episode 8 of The Return, was a really fun one, going deep into the lore and mythology and hearing what Stacey made of it upon first watch as well. So I love that. Thank you for that comment and question, Nick. This comes from Cody from Phoenix. Cody says, overall, I felt this was a strong season of the podcast. It was a lot of fun to see how foundational so many of these earlier films have been from the start. Like, each conversation after a point was about how this is a Frankenstein story and that is a Jekyll and Hyde story. They are so concrete at their hearts, but so flexible in the kinds of stories that can be told. I really enjoy the flexibility of the films and the season over. Sure, it gets a little redundant after so many Frankenstein variations, but that's kind of the strength of the genre. It never falls out of relevance. Thank you for that, Cody. This comes from Miles from Bristol. Miles says, hi Mike, it's been an amazing season. Love this subgenre, and for the first time I committed to watching every single film covered on the podcast week by week. What a journey. Question: what film from this list did you find most relevant to contemporary fears about technology on this viewing? And were there any that felt the least relevant today? Oh, do you know what? I feel like, Miles, I was having that conversation every single week about how every film feels relevant in some way or another. I guess if I had to pick one that really felt like, holy shit, this movie is incredible, not just in how it was made, but how much it foresaw sort of popular culture that was to come, I would say maybe Perfect Blue, the anime film from 1997. And this movie, and I talked about it so much with Becky, I was just knocked out by this movie about how in a very slight 90-minute runtime, it touches upon kind of pop star culture, sort of manufactured pop groups, but also internet horror, stalkers, sort of incel culture, toxic fandom, the entertainment industry. It is an unbelievable film, and some of the themes that it touched upon, I would have said would be incredibly prescient to cover now in 2026, but it covered them in 1997. So that one really stood out to me as like, holy shit, this is unbelievably prescient and ahead of its time and still relevant today. In terms of films that feel less relevant, I mean, I guess The Island of Dr. Moreau or The Island of Lost Souls. Hopefully that's not happening too much out there in the world, right? I like to think that one is confined to the kind of annals of fiction and science fiction. But again, an amazing film to cover all the same. This comes from A from Ireland. They say, I noted from your series that there were not many films from the 2010s in this subgenre. With those that were covered, Prometheus, Blade Runner 2049, Child's Play 2019, tending to be entries in long-running franchises that already existed, not brand new stories about the horrors of tech. An exception would be Ex Machina, where our sympathies were more with the AI than the humans. Then, in the 2020s, you see a lot more films in the tech genre with tech portrayed more negatively. That is a really interesting observation, actually, and it's true. And I don't know whether that is to do with the tech itself or the themes becoming less relevant, because I don't think they were less relevant through the 2010s. But I do wonder if it was that's just the nature of horror cycles, because throughout the 2010s, and we've talked about this a lot on the history of the podcast, what we saw was a resurgence of the opposite end of the spectrum to techie horror. We saw the folk horror revival, right? Storytellers seemed more interested in going back to the occult, to going back to living in the woods, to ritual sacrifices, to religion. It seemed like storytellers were kind of getting away from, in fact, they were almost trying to come up with stories where people lose their mobile phones or get away from technology, or we might set something, in the 18th century or the 16th century or whatever. Like it felt more like through the 2010s, we were not in such a sci-fi techie place. We were more in a let's go back to the scratchy woods kind of a place, right? And then that is inevitably, as horror cycles do, kind of flipped back the other way. And now we really are commenting on kind of AI and the dangers of technology again. So, yeah, I think that's a really interesting observation, but I don't think it has anything to do with what we were scared of or the themes. In fact, I think it may be to do with an oversaturation of tech and social media through the 2010s, that horror storytellers were looking in the opposite direction, maybe. Thank you for that comment. This comes from Craig from Cornwall. Craig says, "Hello, Mike. Episodes were insightful and entertaining as always, but I must confess to getting a little burned out on Frankenstein at the start of this series. Once the series opened up to different types of films, I had a lot more fun with it." Yeah, I mean, a lot of people said this. It was really funny, actually. Like, in those first few weeks, there were certain comments that were popping up on podcast apps of people going, "What? Another Frankenstein film? Really?" And I mean, yeah, maybe that was a mistake. Maybe I shouldn't have covered so many Frankenstein films. It's really tough, you know, when you want to be thorough, and you'll always get a lot of people complain that some movies were missed out, and so you try to be a bit more completionist, and then people will get bored of the repetition, right? And I understand that. So it's a tricky double-edged sword in some regard. I am interested by this reaction to covering so many Frankensteins, because I think we covered Frankenstein adaptations for about 6 weeks, which was the exact same amount of time that we covered Dracula adaptations in our vampire series. It was the exact same thing. We went from Dracula the novel to the Universal years to the Hammer years to some of the later adaptations to, you know, a spoof. And we did the exact same thing with Frankenstein. And with Dracula, there wasn't that same fatigue. At least I didn't hear that from listeners, whereas with Frankenstein I did. So I think that's interesting. Maybe there's something about the Frankenstein myth that is less appealing to people than Dracula. People were less interested in watching or discussing lots of different Frankenstein adaptations. So I'll bear that in mind for future. Maybe in future seasons we won't do that again. Maybe, you know, when it comes to The Mummy, for example, maybe I'll just do the original 1930s one and then leave all of the rest for a Patreon bonus or something else. Thank you for that, Craig. This comes from Paul from Suffolk. Paul says, "This season has been great. I was not sure at first, as lots of overlap and potential repetition with other topics, but it really has its own thing, and you could feel the theme strong throughout." Question: how long does it take you to plan and program a series, and what is the process? Oh, I mean, how long have you got? I won't go into this in too much detail because I've talked about this before, but essentially I will come up with the theme of the series. Usually I'll try and do something that either complements or is kind of completely different, a kind of breath of fresh air from the previous series. So that's kind of point number one, is finding an interesting theme that we haven't tackled yet, but also one that feels like it's going to be something a bit fresh and different to the previous season. Then I will come up with the kind of core texts, you know, the main movies, the big hitters, the big milestones. If I'm you know, doing Nature Bites Back, I think, right, I have to have The Birds, I have to have Jaws, you know, whatever. And then it's a case of kind of figuring out the lesser known movies, and that's where I get to do all of my fun research, and I'm reading books and websites and blogs and all sorts, and watching documentaries. And then eventually I will approach my guests, and actually I often take a lot of advice from guests and listeners of the podcast in terms of what films get included. So often my guests will suggest to me, "Oh, I would love to talk about this movie if you're doing this theme." It might be a movie that I didn't even consider. For example, this series, Dan Martin, who has an incredible kind of deep cut, you know, horror film knowledge, when I revealed to him that I was doing Man-Made Monsters, he said, "Please, can I do Andy Warhol's Flesh for Frankenstein?" which I would not have included on my list had it not been for Dan Martin. So I was really glad that he introduced me to that absolute banger. And then I will introduce the theme to my listeners, usually to patrons first. And actually, Evolution of Horror Patreon subscribers have been amazing. They often get involved in the conversation and suggest titles and suggest ideas for programming and pairings and that kind of thing. So it's an ongoing thing, and actually it changes even as I'm recording the series. It's never like I've got a list set in stone. It's constantly changing. I was still adding movies and taking movies out of this Man-Made Monsters series all the way up until the last minute. So it's a gradual thing, and it's a community-driven thing. This comes from Valerie from Spalding. She says, "Hello, Mike. I loved the Man-Made Monsters season. Quite a few films I had seen and a few I had added to my to-watch list. Loved that you started the season with my favourite goth, Mary Shelley, and throughout it really highlighted the impact that Frankenstein had on this subgenre. Also, it was really interesting to hear the different views on AI. Although I hate the idea of AI with a passion, it was really good to hear different perspectives. Perfect season to follow on from Nature Bites Back." Thank you, Val. This comes from Peter from Melbourne. Peter says, "Hello, Mike. The emerging theme of could versus should did not fizzle out. It was clear how many variations could come from it and a wealth of social commentary. The 2001 Space Odyssey choice was so inspiring. I watched it again at the first opportunity. A superb lineup of movies and guests with some haunting insights." Thank you so much, Peter. This comes from Michael from London. Hi, Mike. The series name, Man-Made Monsters. Is there an argument to be made that many of the films covered don't actually involve monsters, but rather creations? Hal is terrifying, but is it really a monster? The dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, are they killing because they're evil, or because they're acting on instinct, or just trying to survive? And isn't Frankenstein's creature one of the most sympathetic in horror movie history? Was there any other titles that you considered for this series? Yes, I mean, of course, you know, if you're listening to the podcast up until this point, you may have heard my conclusion section at the beginning of this episode, in which I pondered exactly that, right? You know, I think there's a little bit of irony almost, isn't there, in the term man-made monsters, because 90% of the time, the creatures, the creations are not the monsters. It is man that is the monster, right? I think that's the main thing we learn from Frankenstein and from pretty much every other movie of this subgenre since. So I think that in itself has been really interesting. I did consider lots of titles, actually, and I think more questions kind of touch upon this, but I'll just say now that, you know, initially I think I was thinking about maybe calling it Science Bites Back. I think that was the original title I had at the end of the trailer when I first dropped it, because it was very much supposed to be a response to Nature Bites Back. And as you can see from the lineup of films, not all of them are monster movies. Some of them are just about the dangers of science and tech. Movies like Pulse or Perfect Blue or whatever. But people didn't like that. People commented going, well, that's a great idea for a series, but a shit title. So I was like, oh, right, fine. So I changed it to Man-Made Monsters based on a lot of other people's suggestions, basically. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Technically, they're not man-made monsters, all of them, you know? But, you know, it's just the title, isn't it? What are you going to do? This comes from Kyle from Stoke. He says, where does Man-Made Monsters rank for you in all of the subgenres and seasons covered so far? Oh, that's a hard one, Kyle. I would say sort of upper middle, right? If I was to pick my personal favourites, just in terms of the films covered, the ones I've enjoyed the most have been the seasons that have been slightly more vague and amorphous in terms of their themes. So I would say it's between the Mind and Body series, the Home Invasion series, and the Folk Horror series. These are my three favourite seasons. They'd be my top three in some kind of order. The Home Invasion season maybe was my absolute favourite, because I wasn't just covering traditional home invasion. I was covering anything kind of domestic set. Movies like The Spiral Staircase, Baby Jane, Gaslight, you know, all of those, Rebecca. Some really interesting kind of psychological horror movies that I love. So that for me is probably my favourite. Those are my top three, and I reckon Man-Made Monsters would maybe be just below that. I liked it more than zombies. I liked it more than slashers. I liked it more than Nature Bites Back, and I liked it more than vampires as well. So it's definitely upper middle, right, I would say, for me. All right, this question comes from Justin from Chicago. Justin says, hello, Mike. Again, another brilliant series that kept me captivated and smiling for all the hours and miles I'm on the road for work every morning. Perfectly constructed, great choice of films to highlight, and the conversations were second to none. Thank you, Justin. Sean from Kildare in Ireland says, hi, Mike. I've loved it. This is a subgenre that has a good mix of silly, camp fun, and serious chillers within it. So it was a very mixed season, not too heavy like Home Invasion and not too safe like some of the others. I love that. Thank you, Sean. And again, like, that is what I try to do more and more as the podcast has gone on, is not to try and cover the same type of movie with the same type of tone over and over again. I like it when it varies wildly. I like it when we have something a little bit more family friendly to something, that was banned as a video nasty. That to me is a feature and not a bug. Jordan from Southeast London says, "Hello, Mike. Well, this was really fun. Some stuff I had never found without the podcast. Threads. Bro, not cool." I think about that film at least once a day now. Loved hearing the 2001 Space Odyssey episode in this category, and it's been fun/scary to see all the old AI films being no longer sci-fi, but more like real life. Yes, thank you, Jordan. And yeah, I can only apologise to everyone listening about Threads. And like I say, that's kind of what I love about mixing it up. I think there was a run of episodes in the middle of this season where we went from Terminator and RoboCop to Reanimator to Threads to Deadly Friend and Shopping Mall to Akira and Perfect Blue. And that to me is a joy. I love that we get to cover the whole gamut across a few weeks there in kind of 80s horror sci-fi cinema. So I loved getting to do that, and I loved getting to talk about Threads. Talking about Threads is a lot more interesting than watching it, or is a lot less traumatic, I should say, than watching it. So there you go. This comes from Clarice from Porto in Portugal. Oh, hello, Clarice. This season was a great experience. I found out how to introduce horror into my boyfriend's life, and I also realised how much of an unnerving feeling this topic actually brings to me. It's quite extraordinary how art impacts one's life. This comes from Chris from Kentucky. Chris says, "Hello, Mike. I've loved this season. A lot more unexpected films than I initially would have thought. This season made me realise that sci-fi horror is a much bigger hybrid than I had considered. I usually think about aliens or cosmic horror, but it certainly encompasses the scope of mad science as well." This comes from Aaron from Sydney. Aaron says, "Hello, Mike. Congratulations on another season down, and thanks for all of your hard work. I felt sorry for you halfway through, as it sounded like you were juggling too many balls and needed a good rest. It seems like you're in a bit of a quandary, as listeners like me want you to cover the largest number of films possible, but the result is that seasons could literally go on for years, and understandably, sometimes the discussion points get a bit samey. Having man-made monsters follow Nature Bites Back made sense in terms of their complementary subject matter, but their sometimes similar tropes and plot lines, e.g. the plethora of mad scientists, added to the feeling that the season was stretching on a bit. I do appreciate that you made a real effort to mix things up when you could, but the fact that the season kicked off with 6 episodes about Frankenstein, and that still didn't cover all of the most prominent candidates, illustrates that you were sometimes trapped in a rut not of your own making." Interesting. Thank you, Aaron, for that feedback. And yes, you're absolutely right. Some people, I've already touched upon this. Some people you can't please because you don't cover enough movies. Some people you can't please because you cover the same thing too much. It's all about finding that balance. Hopefully, for most people, I managed to find that balance. This comes from Kimberly in Newport. Why have you never covered the Being Human series? I love Being Human, very nearly on par with Inside Number 9, Black Mirror, and Doctor Who. Do you hate it? You surely have to know about it. Perhaps you're saving this for your werewolf season, although ghosts and vampires also feature throughout, as well as succubi, zombies, and other horror beings. Russell Tovey, Mark Gatiss, and other big names star in many seasons. I found this podcast late in the Nature Bites Back series and have caught up on most series. You have been a lifesaver. This podcast has gotten me through a very dark time. Oh, thank you so much, Kimberly. That is a lovely message. And I mean, you're right. I should cover Being Human at some point. Being Human, for people who haven't, who don't know what it is, because I'm not sure how popular it is outside of the UK, but it was a British, I believe, BBC drama about basically 3 monsters in a house share together, right? It's like a vampire, a ghost, and a zombie or something. It's like, or a vampire, a ghost, and a werewolf, but they're all kind of 3 young cool people, and they're all sharing a house. And then it kind of goes on, and the mythology kind of expands and things. And it was a really fun idea. I didn't love the show as much as you did, Kimberly, and I do often struggle to cover a lot of TV shows on this podcast. People ask me a lot, especially over on Patreon, if I can cover shows like Supernatural and, you know, if I can do more Doctor Who and that kind of stuff. And sometimes it's like these shows are just too big and they require too many hours of watching. If it's a show that I know really well anyway, like Black Mirror or, in my case, Battlestar Galactica or Buffy, then I can quite easily jump in and have a conversation about it. But on the whole, TV is a trickier one to cover on this particular podcast. This comes from Aaron from Wisconsin, USA, who says, this has been one of the most dynamic and entertaining seasons of the podcast so far, with scarily relevant themes tied to a very real modern fear, arguably more than any other season. How has this season changed your perspective on technology and AI? And how do you think horror films will evolve in the coming years and into the future as AI advances and looms over our reality? Great questions, Aaron. I think actually I'm going to be a bit optimistic for once about this kind of thing, because we've talked so much throughout the last 37 weeks about how technology is going to kill us all, about how AI is going to destroy the world. And I think the one thing I have learned from this series actually is that we've been fearing technology forever, right? Every time there is a new type of tech that advances and is created, we're terrified that it means it's going to be the end of the world, right? And that's what we've seen throughout this subgenre. That's what's been so interesting about this subgenre, is that whether it's the creation of the atomic bomb, whether it's advances in medicine, in, I don't know, cosmetic surgery, in robotics, in the internet, in digital technology, in TV, virtual reality, anything, it's like, oh God, this is the end of civilization as we know it, right? And, you know, so far, touch wood, that hasn't been the case, right? So I think the one thing I have learned is maybe I and other people need to stop worrying quite so much that right now, 2026, things are worse than they've ever been. Because maybe 'twas ever thus, right? Maybe we've always thought that civilization is on the brink of collapse. At least that's what I'm hoping is the case. And that, you know, us here living in our 2020s with all of our worries and anxieties don't have anything more to fear than people did during, you know, the Bay of Pigs crisis in the early 1960s, right? So in that way, it's kind of given me a bit of optimism. But in terms of what is going to feature in films going forward, I think we're probably going to get more of the same. We're going to get more horror films that are going to comment and satirize the world of social media, AI, kind of post-truth. I think that idea of post-truth, of, you know, nobody knowing what to believe anymore, I think maybe that could be explored a little bit more in future horror movies. But I think there's also a chance that we might get burned out on these kinds of AI technology, science-centric movies, and the pendulum could swing back the other way. We could end up back in the woods again in a few years' time. We could end up back where we were in the 2010s by the end of the 2020s, and we're in the midst of another folk horror revival. I don't know. Let's see what happens. This comes from Lily from Amsterdam. Lily says, "Hello, Mike. The man-made monsters subgenre is one of the most enduring forms of horror because it reflects humanity at the exact moment it crosses a boundary it cannot uncross. From Mary Shelley's creature assembled from stolen bodies to artificial intelligence that rewrites identity and biotechnology that redesigns life itself. These stories are not about monsters escaping laboratories, but about responsibility escaping control. They remind us that every technological leap carries an emotional shadow, and that the real terror is not what we create, but the possibility that our creations will inherit our loneliness, our ambition, and our mistakes." Ooh, Lily, that was beautifully put and beautifully written. I should have got you to write my conclusion for me. You've done a much better job than I did. Thank you for that. And on that note, I think I'm going to leave it there in terms of feedback. I'm so sorry I didn't manage to get to every... I had some brilliant questions and feedback from people, hundreds of different messages in the mailbag, people asking why I didn't cover Existenz, why I didn't cover any Golem movies. I apologise. In response to all of those questions, as a blanket response, it is to say some films I just didn't have time for or didn't have the opportunity to rewatch, but they will get covered in future seasons and future themes, I promise. All right, let's hurtle into the listeners' top 10 man-made monsters movies. So, as I mentioned before, a massive thank you to Val, who helped me collate all of these results, and a big thank you to all of you. We had hundreds of you send in your top 10s. We have collated the results. We've scored them as we always do. So your number 1 pick got 10 points, your number 10 pick got 1 point, etc. And we have tallied up the scores. And, it is such a strong top 10 and such a varied top 10 as well. So let's get straight into it. The listener's number 10 pick was a movie that we didn't even cover this series, but I can't blame you all for including it in your top 10s because it is an all-timer. Your number 10 pick is David Cronenberg's The Fly.
I'm saying I'm an insect who dreamt he was a man and loved it. But now the dream is over and the insect is awake.
No, sir.
I'm saying I'll hurt you this day.
This movie, of course, was covered in our Mind and Body series a few years ago. Of course, this is one of the most important films in the evolution of body horror and in David Cronenberg's career. But it is, of course it is a man-made monsters movie, right? It is about Seth Brundle, who is an inventor, a scientist, a mad scientist who lets his hubris get the better of him, and he turns himself into a hideous fly creature. I mean, I don't need to tell you how much I love this movie. If you heard me talk about it before, you've probably heard me say, I think this movie is utterly perfect in every way. It is not just one of the best horror films, it's one of the best films ever made, I think. And I'm so glad most of you guys agree. Miles from Bristol said, Jeff Goldblum gets to be one of the best mad scientists in The Fly and one of the best voices of reason in Jurassic Park. Absolutely. Justin from Chicago says, Cronenberg hitting on every cylinder possible here. It's gross, terrifying, heartbreaking, and even when it gets over the moon crazy, it still feels like it could happen. Paul from Suffolk says, many point to Frankenstein as the main focus for this theme. And while I agree that this film and story is the progenitor, I have to say that this film is the perfect example. The sad irony of man destroyed by his own intellect and hubris. He is both man and monster, and we both fear and feel for him. Cast and crew knocked it out of the park. Anna from London says, you've got to have a Cronenberg on your list. A beautiful and disgusting film, and a rare mad scientist film where I actually feel for the scientist in question. Incredible. Love that so many of you guys included that film. It is one of those monster movies that always makes me cry. I absolutely love it. So that's your number 10 man-made monster movie. That is David Cronenberg's The Fly from 1986. We also had a couple of votes for the original The Fly from the 1950s as well, though not enough, sadly, to get into the top 10. At number 9, a much more recent film and very much a kind of thought-provoking high-concept sci-fi. I'm glad to see so many of you love this film. At number 9, it's Alex Garland's Ex Machina.
Hi. I'm Caleb.
Hello, Caleb.
Do you have a name?
Yes. Ava.
I'm pleased to meet you, Ava.
I'm pleased to meet you too.
I love Alex Garland so much. I've been thrilled to get to cover so many of his films across various different seasons of this podcast. And of course, this is the guy who wrote 28 Days Later. He wrote The Beach. He was known for his kind of writing mainly and his collaborations with Danny Boyle. And this was his first attempt at directing. And this is when we suddenly realized, oh shit, Alex Garland is a multi-threat, right? He is an incredible director as well as being a brilliant writer. Ex Machina holds up remarkably and terrifyingly well, actually, in its depiction of kind of tech bro culture and sort of AI and computer advances as well. So let's see what you guys have to say. Vincent from Lancaster says, Ex Machina is an eerie, beguiling and enthralling exploration of identity, consciousness and personhood. Paul, aka Snake Plissken, hey Snake, says, this film's amazing. I rewatched it and was shocked at how much more relevant it is now. It actually disturbed me. Cameron from Georgia, USA says, the two male leads on the film got played by a female android who just wanted to be free of the both of them. Orin from Phoenix says, you can see hints of Alex Garland's Men in this. The male character's fear of having a mind or free will is a metaphor for their fear of women having a mind or free will. Love that. Kyle from Stoke says, while not necessarily perfectly directed, the script is stupidly smart and slick. I'm always amazed at just how tight this film is, with fantastic performances throughout. And Gonzalo from Uruguay, hi Gonzalo, says this would be a 5-star film without the dance scene, but I love it anyway. Oh, that's a controversial take, Gonzalo. I think loads of people love the dance scene in this movie, but so many lovely comments about this film from you guys. It was in so many of your top 10s. It's really, really nice to see, actually, how much people still love this film, and actually how appreciation for it seems to be growing over the last 10 years as well. So there you go. That's your number 9 pick. That is Ex Machina. At number 8... now, this is where we get to just how fun and varied this list is, because at number 8, you voted for Paul Verhoeven's RoboCop.
Clarence Bodiger, you are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Fuck you.
This movie is absolutely bonkers, isn't it? And I think I appreciate it more and more every time I watch it. I loved discussing this film with Chris Hewitt during this series. It's so gnarly. I think that's the thing that people forget about this movie, or people, underestimate it before they've seen it for the first time, because, I don't know, we think of RoboCop maybe associated now with, like, slightly more mainstream pop culture iconography, I think. And it spawned, didn't it spawn a cartoon and stuff, right? So whereas I think people are pretty shocked to see that the movie is very adult, it's very satirical, it's got a lot of kind of social and political commentary, but it's also really fucking gross and dark and gory and quite mean-spirited as well, in a glorious way. I love this movie. So glad so many of you guys included it on your list. Mary from Perth says, emotive, bloody lunacy from Verhoeven. Love that. Wes from Pennsylvania says, I saw this film in the theatre when I was 11. My mum told my dad not to let me watch professional wrestling on TV because she thought it was too violent, so instead we went to see RoboCop. Incredible. Jodie from Buffalo, New York says, absolutely devastating film to me, but it's also so quotable. My husband and I say, I'd buy that for $1 all the time. Joe from Litchfield says, as a kid, this film traumatized me with its violence and its body horror. The guy melting in acid literally haunted my nightmares, but I still loved it, of course. Dave from Massachusetts said this film was a huge part of my youth. I actually trick-or-treated as this guy. So again, I think there's something really interesting there, right, about how this movie had an almost kid appeal, really, at the time. And so it is kind of shocking just how dark and gross it is as well. That is your number 8 pick. That is Paul Verhoeven's RoboCop. All right, up to your number 7, and it is the most recent film in the top 10. In fact, it is one of the most recent films covered in this series. Your number 7 is Coralie Farjar's The Substance.
Have you ever dreamt of a better version of yourself? Younger, more beautiful, more perfect. One single injection unlocks your DNA and will release another version of yourself. This is The Substance.
Well, this was only discussed last week on the podcast as our very last movie of the series. This is, of course, an Oscar-nominated gem. It is, for my money, a masterpiece. Demi Moore's performance, Margaret Qualley, that incredible direction, the visuals, the bonkers final act, just how hard it goes on the body horror. I love everything about this movie. I'm so glad you guys love it too. Alex from Strange Haven says, this was quite possibly the best cinema experience I have ever had. I love every facet of this film, from the social commentary, the beautiful design, the music, the brilliant prosthetics, and the amazing performances. And that ending. Laura from Virginia says, when this was in theatres, they should have taken your picture while you were watching the film, like on the rides at Disneyland. It's so true, Laura. It's so true, because I remember the gasps of shock, the kind of recoiling at the gross moments, the agape mouths, especially in the final act of the film when I was sitting in my screening. So yeah, completely agree. I think you never forget the first time you watch this movie. Eugene from New Zealand says, all the yum plus lots of ew plus heaps of yuck equals pure cinema. Jonas from Essen in Germany says, a very striking commentary and all the same a very well-made modern Jekyll and Hyde story with fantastic body horror and just enough horniness. More movies should embrace being weird rather than not even try. Justin from Chicago says, I loved this movie. The only reason it wasn't higher on my top 10 list is because of how recently it was released. And David from Bristol says, the climax had me doing happy little claps in the cinema. Incredible. Yeah, I'm so glad you guys enjoyed it. And it's really interesting. Some of you kind of put it lower down on your list because it's so recent. Some of you made a note to say that you didn't include it on your list because it was so recent. So it'll be really interesting to see how in maybe 10 years' time, how well that film still fares. Will people still put it in their list of all-timers? I've got a feeling they probably will. So at your number 7, that is Coralie Farge's The Substance. Up to number 6 now, and we are going right back to the beginning of cinema. On the other end of the spectrum, at number 6, you guys have voted for the Universal Monster sequel, The Bride of Frankenstein from 1935.
The Bride of Frankenstein.
God, I love this movie. This was way back at the beginning of the series where I foolishly decided that I was going to pair Frankenstein with Bride of Frankenstein and try and discuss both with James Swanton in one conversation. And trying to contain James Swanton's knowledge and passion and enthusiasm within, a quick chat is almost impossible. And I soon realised while we were in the middle of recording that I couldn't hurry James up. There were too much to say about these movies, and we had to split it into 2 separate episodes. So Bride of Frankenstein got its own 2-hour discussion. What a movie, right? I mean, I think in so many ways, this is one of the best horror sequels ever made. And it was one of the first horror sequels ever made, right? So I think it's amazing how well it holds up. I think James actually said in our episode that James Whale's movies have held up so well. They are examples of movies made in the 1930s that you don't have to make excuses for. They are still every bit as good and unproblematic as they were in the 1930s. Whether it's Frankenstein, Bride, Invisible Man, or The Old Dark House, these are still absolute all-timers in terms of how well they're made and just how entertaining they are. So you guys loved this movie, of course. It popped up in so many top 10s. Meg from New York City said, James Whale for the win. How amazing that we got a sequel like this at all. So clearly the product of one very unique and clever mind. Hazel from Chesterfield says, an example of a sequel that improves on the original. Not to take away any prestige from Mary Shelley herself and her seminal work, but I can't help but think that she would have wholeheartedly approved of The Bride of Frankenstein for its emotional resonance, the empathetic creature, as well as how it leans into its gothic and camper tones with the aid of the higher production value. And Valerie from Spalding says, such a brilliant classic. Bride of Frankenstein is quite a sweet movie, and despite the bride only being on screen for 3 minutes, has quite the impact. Every time I watch it, I always forget quite how funny the film is too. A joy on every rewatch. And Keith from Carlisle simply says, camp as tits. Yes, it is. And we love the movie all the more for it. That's your number 6. That is James Whale's Bride of Frankenstein. All right, into your top 5 now. And it's close, actually. Between sort of numbers 5 and 2, it was very, very close. But at number 5, you guys voted for a bit of a sci-fi classic. Arguably less of a horror film than anything else on this list. But you guys have voted for Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. Now, I have mentioned a few times, including on our episode, that I don't love Blade Runner. And for me, there is still something that I feel like I am missing in terms of my enjoyment for this movie. As much as I can admire it, and boy do I admire it, I think this movie looks stunning. I love the music. I love the vibe of this movie. And I appreciate a lot of the themes that it's exploring. But I actually think on a fundamental narrative level, I'm always left a bit cold by this movie and its characters. Maybe that's the point. Maybe I'm supposed to be left a bit cold by a movie that is about androids, right? But it's always a movie that I can't ever quite put in my top 10s because as much as I admire the art and craft of this film, I can't ever sort of emotionally connect with it. But obviously, I realise I am in the absolute minority here. So many of you guys love this film and included it in your top 10s. So, Adam from Ipswich says, this is my dad's favourite film. It's such a dad's favourite film. I don't really think of it as horror unless all film noirs are horror films in a sense. You're absolutely right, Adam. It is one of my dad's favourite films. You know, it is very much a dad movie. Paul from Suffolk says, set aside the visuals if you can, and the underlying story on identity and humanity is strong. Hauer is the beating heart, ironically, of this movie. John from Colorado says, I've loved reading the Philip K. Dick story and I loved Ridley's dystopian vision. Lily from Amsterdam said, the artificial being is morally superior to the creator. Replicants are the emotional completion of Frankenstein's creature. They want memory, identity, dignity, and lifespan. The monster becomes indistinguishable from us. Julian from Hove says, a style and vibes film until that climax comes about, and it's both terrifying and emotional. Every future cityscape now looks like this, but no future cityscape looks quite as evocative. And Anna from London says, I know this film is Marmite, but I am definitely on team love it. Deckard is kind of awful. The plot is confusing because it was slashed to bits and it leaves you with so many questions, not least what was that actually good or just really stylish. But I think those imperfections are what I find so endlessly fascinating about Blade Runner. There you go. I mean, some great arguments for why this movie is such a beloved masterpiece. That's your number 5 pick. That is Ridley Scott's Blade Runner from 1982. Up to your number 4 then, and of course this is going to be high on your list. It was always going to be high. It's an all-timer. It's the OG. Your number 4 man-made monster movie is James Whale's Frankenstein from 1931.
It is one of the strangest tales ever told. It deals with the two great mysteries of creation, life and death. I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
James Whale officially being the only director in this top 10 to have 2 entries on the list. So, I mean, what is there to say about this movie? I do think it is probably the most influential horror film ever made. I think it still looks and sounds and feels every bit as beautiful and masterful as it did nearly 100 years ago, right? This film is nearly 100 years old. That is insane. Chelsea from Leeds says, a true classic in every sense of the word. The combination of Whale's artful direction and Karloff's sympathetic performance means it stood the test of time more than any other movie from this decade. Delightful to look at. Perfection in every frame. Sally from Melbourne says, I chose this film over the Guillermo del Toro version simply because it was pioneering and a wonderful example of the intersection of queerness and horror. Nikki from the USA says, well, it's just the best. Karloff makes me cry, and I'm always shocked at how much I care. Michael from London says, for me, there is only one man who can play Frankenstein's creature, and it's Boris Karloff. And Annika from Leicester says, it's the ultimate man-made monster movie. When we think of monsters, we think of Boris Karloff in Frankenstein, a true definition of a classic, and surely the most influential horror movie of all time. Yes, even more so than Dracula. Couldn't agree more, Annika. And there you go. That is your number 4 pick. That is James Whale's Frankenstein from 1931. Spoiler alert, that is the only Frankenstein adaptation in your top 10. I mean, unless you count Bride. But in terms of straight Frankenstein movies, the Hammer movie didn't quite make it into the top 10. The Kenneth Branagh movie didn't make it into the top 10. The Del Toro movie didn't make it into the top 10. Just James Whale's version. It's the original, kind of. I mean, I know there were a few earlier silent versions, but let's call it the original and the best. There you go. All right, into your top 3 then. Just looking at this top 3 just shows how strong this subgenre is and how many classics were included this series. Number 3, it's time for a bit of Kubrick. It's 2001: A Space Odyssey. I was thrilled to include this series because it's a movie that I've always found fascinating and I've always wanted to cover on the podcast. And I nearly covered it in my space series, in my cosmic horror series. It very easily could have gone in that series, actually. But I think in terms of the themes and that idea of technology and man's relationship to technology and creating life and who creates us and all of that, I actually think it's more interesting to talk about in the mad science or man-made monsters context because of the character of Hal. So I loved getting to discuss this movie with Kevin Lyons, who, of course, you know, he's talked often about how this is his favourite film of all time. Such a fountain of knowledge when it comes to this film. So it was one of my favourite episodes to record. And obviously, it had so much love from you guys too. It was in so many of your top 10 lists. James from Sligo says, 2001 is part of my film life. Shown at a young age by my dad, dialogue and scenes live rent-free in my head all the time. So this is my number 1 across many themes, and it has to be here on my number 1 in this list. I'm also a big fan of 2010, as it expands on the full context. It was never Hal's fault. It was the humans that programmed him with conflicting instructions. The computer brain shutdown scene is so sad. A lot of you guys have a lot of love for 2010. It's still a film I've never seen. I'm going to have to check it out at some point. Camilla from Warsaw says, how come Stanley Kubrick managed to make 2+ hour movies that I'm not even mad about? This movie has everything. It's a feast, and Hal's voice is enough to give me the creeps. Let's face it, if AI gets us, it's not going to be a man-killing machine. It's going to be a program that refuses to go against its rules. Michael from London says, Stanley Kubrick's greatest film. Beautiful and terrifying. Wes from Pennsylvania says, perfect film, no notes. This one is sensory overload that every time I get to the end, I'm in tears and I don't know why. If ever I'm in London, I'll look up Kevin Lyons to see if he wants to have a few beers at the pub and discuss 2001. Oh my God, Wes, Kev will absolutely take you up on that offer if you do make it over to London. I just hope you can set aside an afternoon or possibly a couple of days for that conversation. Glenn from Kent says, at the same time, Kubrick's most genius and inaccessible movie. It's a true wonder of a film. I honestly believe you have to watch it multiple times to grow your appreciation. And Ivan from Colombia simply says, I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid this one belongs in the top 10. Well, there you go. It absolutely does belong in the top 10. It is your number 3 pick from this series. That is 2001: A Space Odyssey. Into the top 2 now. And at your number 2, another film that really blurs that line between science fiction and horror. Some people would insist that this movie is sci-fi. Other people, rightly, would argue that this movie is very much a horror film, if not a slasher film. Your number 2 is James Cameron's The Terminator from 1984. I'm so glad there's still so much love for this film. I almost worry that its legacy has been somewhat tarnished by everything that's come since, you know? So I'm really glad there is still so much love for The Terminator. Hazel from Chesterfield says, this movie has got it all. Sci-fi, action, horror, romance. In spite of all of its whip-smart time travel cat and mouse, I do think that the real heart of this film is the core love story between Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor. I feel that it's the emotional thread that gives the best of these films their longevity, which is the real reason the second film has such love. The big budget special effects won't stand the test of time, but the human element, if done well, always wins out. Cody from Phoenix says the images are iconic, the dialogue is foundational, the fears are universal. When we talk about the machines taking over, this is the image we put in our heads. The grittiness and nastiness of this movie in particular is hard to unshake after a first viewing. Cameron lets his nightmares fly, and he found a perfect vessel in this with Arnold. The sequel is fantastic in its own right as well, but for pure horror and imagery, there is none who stand above the original. Miles from Bristol says Skynet has been elevated to a true cultural boogeyman, but this also remains a perfect slasher film. Jay from Brooklyn says the best sci-fi horror film, the best man-made monsters film, the best slasher film, the best James Cameron film. The Terminator has it all. God, Jay, I mean, I can't argue with most of that, except I would argue that Aliens is better than the Terminator. And finally, Lucy from Edinburgh says, as with Alien, this film's legacy may have been somewhat tarnished by some of the terrible recent sequels, but every time I revisit the original, I'm bowled over by just how slick, smart, scary, sexy, and thrilling this movie is. An iconic man-made monster in Arnie's T-800, and an iconic final girl in Linda Hamilton's Sarah Connor. This film has it all, an absolute all-timer. Couldn't agree more, Lucy. And there you go. Your number 2 pick is The Terminator from 1984. So what an interesting top 10. I'm just going to run through that top 10 one more time and mention a couple of honourable mentions before I reveal the number 1. So at number 10, you had The Fly from 1986, and number 9, Ex Machina, number 8, RoboCop, number 7, The Substance, number 6, Bride of Frankenstein, number 5, Blade Runner, number 4, Frankenstein from 1931, number 3, 2001, A Space Odyssey, and number 2, The Terminator. And before we reveal the number 1, which by the way was number 1 by a huge margin, I'm just looking now at my grid and it has over 600 points more than the number 2 pick. So by far and away the listener favourite man-made monster movie. I will quickly mention a few other titles that narrowly missed out on making it into the top 10. These are the movies that placed between numbers 20 and 11. So you had Perfect Blue and Akira. Both of these movies just missed out on being on the top 10. Both brilliant films, particularly Perfect Blue. Actually, I think that one may end up in my top 10. Christine, also a classic killer car movie, just missed out on making it into the top 10. We had the J-Horror Pulse as well, probably one of the scariest movies I covered this series, actually. There's a lot of love for that. Both versions of The Invisible Man, the 1933 version directed by James Whale and the Lee Whannell 2020 version, both of these were placed at numbers 15 and 16 on your combined lists. Young Frankenstein and Reanimator, both really fun movies, both narrowly missed out on making it into the top 10. And the bleakest movie that we covered this series, the one that I don't think I ever want to watch again, and I can only apologise to those of you who watched it for the first time, Threads, that also narrowly missed out on your top 10. So many of you put that on your list just to say how well made it was and how it was the scariest, most upsetting thing you've ever seen. So there you go. Those are some honourable mentions. But let's get to your number 1, the movie that you all voted in your droves as your number 1 man-made monsters movie. And it is the movie that we cite over and over again when we talk about the themes of man playing God, of man messing with nature, of man spending so long thinking about whether he could that he never stopped to think whether he should. Your number 1 man-made monster movie is Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park.
Dr. Grant, my dear Dr. Sattler, welcome to Jurassic Park.
I mean, who could argue with that, right? And that's so interesting. It might be the first time in the history of this podcast, actually, that a number one movie in any particular subgenre has been a PG, a family movie, a 4-quadrant movie in a lot of ways, right? A blockbuster. This isn't necessarily your traditional horror film, but of course it is. I mean, it is absolutely terrifying, and it involves people being killed and mutilated and chomped and children being in peril and all kinds of horrible, scary things. But it's also a movie that is a family movie, right? This was my first ever cinema experience when I was 6 years old. I have never been the same since. It is arguably one of the movies that got me into horror. It remains one of my favourite movies of all time. It is still, for my money, Steven Spielberg's best film. I like it even more than Jaws. And isn't that interesting too, actually, that in this pair of seasons, this Nature Bites Back / Man-Made Monsters, almost two sides of the same coin, these seasons, right? They deal with the same kinds of themes and they complement each other. The number one film for both seasons were directed by Steven Spielberg. You had Jaws in Nature Bites Back and now Jurassic Park in Man-Made Monsters. I mean, perfect, right? The perfect double bill. So Knut from Oslo says, the biggest funfair ride imaginable with teeth. Perfect entertainment, and I'm surely not alone in saying about the sequels, they didn't stop to think if they should. Yes, a lot of you made that joke. Sam from London says, I'm currently reading the book. It's awesome. John Hammond is more obviously monstrous and sociopathic. Rich from Farnham says, a groundbreaking film for its time, and it still holds up well today in terms of its special effects. The strong moral and ethical dilemmas posed about the concept of genetic engineering still chillingly ring true today with respect to AI. Jeff Goldblum's character is also really funny and always makes me laugh. I mean, he's so good. He's so weird, isn't he? He's so fucking weird in that film. That's the thing that I'm more impressed by the older I get. At just how weird the characters and the cast were in that film, right? Yeah, sure, this actress from David Lynch movies, this guy from Possession, and this guy from Cronenberg's The Fly. They should be the leads in my multi-million-dollar blockbuster, sure. But it works, you know? Becky from Brighton Hill says, it would be rude not to include Jurassic Park on any top 10. Jeff Goldblum's comment on being so fixated on whether we could that we never stop to think of whether we should is basically the tagline for this whole series. Alice from Iowa says, the T-Rex is amazing, but it was those velociraptors that scared the crap out of me as a kid. Bex from Bath says, how does this film hold up so well in every regard? Super fun, a perfect horror movie which kids can apparently also watch. Julian from Hove says, we've not stopped to think about whether we should, including Jurassic Park sequels. Gonzalo from Uruguay says, the first 3 films were essential to my upbringing. I don't know what that says about my parents. Vincent says, a wild, witty and wondrous thrill ride of tension, action, hubris, spectacle and family. Dan from Christchurch says, hubris and spectacle. Generational filmmaker redefines man-made horror 60 years after the filmic template of Frankenstein. A childhood favourite that holds up to grown-up rewatches. Couldn't agree more. And we had hundreds more comments on that film, but I think I'm going to end that there. What an incredible movie. Your number one Man-Made Monsters film, and I'm delighted about it. That is Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park. And before we wrap up, I will finish with my top 10 Man-Made Monsters list. I'll just run through this very quickly because you've heard about me talk about all these films a lot over the last year, but here comes my top 10. At number 10, I always like to put at least one movie that I have discovered for the first time this series, and the movie that really blew my mind was Flesh for Frankenstein. That is my number 10 pick. This is the bonkers Andy Warhol presented Udo Kier starring movie. I actually got to screen it in 3D this year at the Nickel Cinema in London as well, which was so much fun. It is one of the most insane films I've ever seen, and that line about in order to defeat death, you have to fuck life in the gallbladder. It's up there for me with some of Shakespeare's best work. Unbelievable. Flesh for Frankenstein is my number 10. At number 9, I've gone with Cam. Revisiting this movie with Juliet this year made me realise just how good and smart this movie was. I loved rewatching it, and I really loved the experience of discussing it. And I'm really sad that it's not really available to stream anywhere currently. So I'm hoping that giving it this attention on the podcast will mean that it might inevitably get some sort of plush second sight physical media release. Make it happen, please. At number 8, I've gone with Perfect Blue. As I've already mentioned in this week's episode, that this movie blew my tiny mind. I think it was beautiful to look at. It's creepy. It's gorgeous. It is so rich with themes in a swift, breezy, beautiful 80-minute runtime. It ticks all the boxes for me. I love everything about it. Perfect Blue is my number 8. And number 7, I've gone with what I think might be the darkest of all 1930s horror movies. I've gone with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from 1931. I loved this movie. I couldn't believe how technically accomplished this film is. The in-camera effects, the cinematography, the dark themes, the kind of pre-code nastiness of it blew my mind. I absolutely loved it. That's my number 7, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And number 6, I've gone with Threads, the movie that I think to this day traumatizes me more than any other film. Loved getting to revisit it and discuss it with Anna Bogutskaya this series. Number 5, I have gone with Bride of Frankenstein, James Whale's incredible, camp, beautiful sequel. I absolutely love everything about that film. Probably the most fun horror film from the 1930s, for my money. And number 4, I've gone with The Invisible Man from 2020. Now, I love the original too. I do love James Whale's version, but actually I am constantly bowled over by just how scary Lee Whannell's The Invisible Man is. And in a series that I would say maybe lacked sort of conventional terror, I think this is one of the scariest movies that we covered this series. So I'm putting that high on my list, alongside my number 3 pick, also one of the scariest films covered this series, and that is Pulse from 2001, the iconic J-horror movie, which again, I think is absolutely terrifying. I think it gets better and better with every passing year. It's prescient, it's sad, it's beautiful, and it's utterly haunting. I love that movie, and I loved discussing it with Stacey. At number 2, I mean, my top 2 are very predictable. At number 2, I've gone with James Whale's original Frankenstein from 1931. It's the OG man-made monsters movie, and it is basically one of the best man-made monsters movie. Boris Karloff remains iconic to this day, and that moment when he throws the little girl in the water is still shocking. And again, I just want to reiterate, that film is approaching 100 years old. Insane. And my number 1 pick, of course, matches your number 1. It is Jurassic Park. If Frankenstein set the template, Steven Spielberg created the man-made monster masterpiece, right? And I think it ticks every single box. It is a personal favourite of mine, but I think even objectively, as a podcaster, as a critic, as a cinephile, I think you can't beat Jurassic Park. It is unbeatable. It is perfect. So there you go. My top 10. Number 10, Flesh for Frankenstein. Number 9 is Cam. Number 8, Perfect Blue. Number 7, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Number 6, Threads. Number 5, Bride of Frankenstein. Number 4, The Invisible Man. Number 3, Pulse. Number 2, Frankenstein. And number 1, my number 1 and yours, the greatest man-made monsters movie of all time, Jurassic Park. And that's it for this week, and that's it for this series. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you for writing in, for submitting your top 10s, for supporting this podcast, for being such incredible listeners, for being such an incredible global community at this point as well. A quick note to say that, of course, even though the podcast is now going on a hiatus, there are other EOH podcasts out there you can listen to. Our sister podcast, Hammer Time, is still going every single week. New episodes of that drop every Wednesday, where Becky Dark and Kevin Lyons are watching and discussing every single Hammer horror film in their back catalogue in chronological order. You can also listen to Carry On Up the podcast if you are so inclined. Bond, in which Susan Calman and I have already watched and discussed every single film in the Carry On series, the classic British comedies from the 1960s. And there's also our Twin Peaks podcast, The Detective and the Log Lady, which finished about a year ago, but all episodes are still available, in which Stacey Ponder and I watched and discussed every episode of Twin Peaks. That was one of the most fun podcasts I've ever had the pleasure of making. And don't forget, if you are able to sign up to our Patreon and donate a few quid per month in order to keep this podcast and this network going, you can carry on listening to episodes of EOH every week over the next few months while we are on a hiatus. Patreon.com/evolution of horror. And while we are off the air and you haven't done so already, it's always really, really appreciative if you're able to leave us a rating and review on your podcast apps, if you're able to tweet about us or post about us on Instagram, Blue Sky, Facebook. You know, it's nice for us to not disappear into the ether completely while we're off the air. So keep the love for Evolution of Horror going if you can. You know, keep in contact with us on socials, tag us in posts, write us reviews when you can. So I guess all that's left to do is queue up the next series, which will be kicking off in the autumn of this year. We're going for something very, very different next series. For the last 2 years now, we have been covering two sides of the same coin, essentially nature and science and monster movies and creature features and all of that kind of thing. And they've been very, very fun. But I think I want to go back to some more traditional horror, something a little bit more gothic, something a little bit more uncanny. Next season, now stay with me here because you're going to hear this theme and you're going to go, what? But the theme for the next season is childhood nightmares. Essentially, next season, we are going to be covering a whole series of films that explore the horrors and terrors of childhood. Now, this is going to be a mix of various different types of movies. They are going to be films that deal with the iconography linked to childhood. So we're talking killer dolls, killer ventriloquist dummies, killer clowns. We've not yet covered the It movies on the main podcast. We've not yet covered the Chucky movies on the main podcast. We've not yet covered the Terrifier movies. Magic, Stuart Gordon's Dolls, Dolly Dearest, Annabelle, Insidious, the sorts of movies about childhood horrors and traumas we have not yet covered. We will also be looking at killer kids movies, creepy kids. We're going to be going all the way back to literature to talk about fairy tales and nursery rhymes and the dark roots that so many of these works of children's literature have. We're going to be talking about children's television, stuff that traumatized generations of people throughout their life, stuff like public service information videos from the 70s. And we are going to be covering iconic children's movies that also traumatized generations of kids. Everything from Disney classics like Pinocchio to Jim Henson classics like The Dark Crystal or Labyrinth to weird movies like The Return to Oz to more recent animated films like Coraline. And we'll be looking at where fairy tales and horror cinema meet in films like Pan's Labyrinth or even more recent gems like Zach Cregger's Weapons. It's going to be a really fun series, and I guarantee there's going to be a little something for everyone. So that is going to kick off in the autumn of 2026. But for now, it's time to shut down the system and power off the Man-Made Monsters series. Thank you all for listening, and join us again soon for another episode and another series of the Evolution of Horror.
Hold on to your butts.